installment of Tropes versus Men series. In this definitional episode, we will be going over patriarchy. To look up the definition of patriarchy, it is important to note that there has been a splitting off from the original definition, and we now have two, and it is important to know when and why that happened. When we refer to patriarchy, especially in the context of popular culture or modern media, we do not mean the definition of the male father or the eldest son being considered the head of the family and lineage being traced through the male bloodline. That is not the patriarchy that we frequently see presented in third-wave feminist philosophy and media representations of women's rights movements. Their idea of patriarchy is a rule, a law, the definition that talks about a system of government that has men be in charge and in power and actively exclude women and the entire female gender. It is the idea that men are in power and in charge of running the world, and they do so to the exclusion and to the oppression of women, regardless of their familial attachments. It is an assumption based in this idea that men have a lack of empathy and a lack of desire to see their mothers, grandmothers, daughters and sisters succeed and be happy. It is kind of a sociopathic motivation to spend their lives with women and seek out women and then to deny them pursuits of happiness and well-being and success. The theory further suggests that that has been the way of the world since pretty much the beginning of mankind. In fact, when we look at feminist press materials or talking points, it soon becomes clear that the origin of feminism and the desire of feminism is to overthrow patriarchy. This end game to overthrow patriarchy is where we get the other definitional episode topic of feminism, this idea of equality. Because once you have a patriarchy theory and that all women are oppressed, and all men have power to the exclusion of women, then it is only natural that women would want the same power that men have. And so feminism tries to overthrow patriarchy and thereby give women the same legal rights as men have. And this philosophy of patriarchy as a social order that does not treat women the same as men, it would seem that there would be ample evidence of this idea. Whenever faced with the question of providing tangible evidence for the male dominance over women, one of the only things that we see out of the feminist proponents of patriarchy theory is the wage gap. Aside from the fact that it is illegal to pay someone less for the same job based on their skin color or gender or creed, there has been many evidence that's debunked the wage gap myth. Really quick overview, two major components that contribute to what appears as men earning an annual salary that is bigger than women on average. Biggest contributors are chosen work hours, such as overtime, as well as dangerous jobs that are predominantly chosen by men. These are professions that are most often chosen by men, that are manually and physically intensive, as well as very hazardous, and they include jobs such as construction at great heights, whaling, fracking, logging, and mining. These jobs require a tremendous amount of physical and mental effort and also pay a lot because of their hazardous nature and the risk to bodily harm, injury, and even death. There's also the fact of women desiring to balance their life-work cycle, and they choose jobs as well as professional careers that require less time at the job, and they can spend more time with their family. If we were to follow the wage gap myth to its logical conclusion, since under the capitalist system it is the legal obligation of every business to return profit every quarter, we would see more and more jobs remove all of their male workers and staff only women. If a merit or desire to be in those jobs was not factors and only the gender had to do with the wage gap, then we would see all women staffed at all jobs in order to increase productivity in the bottom line of these companies, which of course we do not see that, and it would be ridiculous to imagine such a world. Back in the idea of patriarchy and that all government and executive managerial positions are filled with men who desire the oppression of women, we would assume that there's a lot of evidence of financial and legal and other opportunities denied to women. Yet we see the opposite of that. We have all women scholarships, all women funds, all women businesses, and companies that promote businesses staffed only by women. However, we do not have male-only businesses and scholarship programs. In fact, it would raise eyebrows if we were to allow, as a society, to have a male-only business. Even traditionally male spaces that are innocuous, such as barbershops and country clubs, are also now being closed and banned. So, in fact, we see the opposite of patriarchy, a desire to deny rights and opportunities to men while giving ample financial and educational opportunities to women specifically. Since the party line of feminism is to overthrow patriarchy eventually and to institute thereby equal rights for women, that begs the question, what are those rights that women do not have that men currently do? I have searched for an answer to this question and have yet to find it. However, I can tell you about 5 legal rights that women have that men do not. Today, currently in the Western society, in the United States specifically, these are 5 legal rights that women have that men do not. First one is that women have a right to genital integrity. And what that refers to is the idea that we accept circumcision as a culture as something that is good and normal and even perhaps necessary, while the idea of female genital mutilation is abhorrent and something that every sane individual strives to stop or campaign against. Yet, at the base, the two actions of circumcision and female genital mutilation are the same. It is cutting off a piece of genitals of a child, and the only difference is between the acceptance of one and the disgust towards the other is the gender of the child, and it is in favor of women. The second right that women have is they have a right to vote without agreeing to die, unlike men. And that is a reference to the Selective Service Agreement, which is the agreement that men sign up towards an extended draft selective service upon turning 18, and that's how they receive their right to vote. And if they do not sign up, they face financial penalties and, of course, imprisonment. Voting is legally given to women without any such stipulations, and we see quite clear removal of autonomy and male rights. The third right that women have is the right to choose parenthood. Women are assumed to have full autonomy over their bodies, and that includes the potential life of their children. Yet the man who had responsibility in making such potential child is not given any say in whether or not that child is born or aborted. We do not give men any legal representation over the choice of keeping or aborting a child. Yet, if the woman decides to keep the child, the man is legally responsible for financial support. Yet he was physically unable and not given the right to make a decision. It is possible and even common to see women who have stopped birth control without telling their partner, and upon the birth of the child, family court has established that the male now is required to financially support this child and this woman, yet he had absolutely no say in making that decision, and his autonomy over his life was removed. The fourth right is that women have the right to be assumed caregivers, and it's not a law that is a hard one on the books per se. It is more of a cultural standard and assumption that women are natural caretakers and the mother's bond with her child is something sacred and should not be meddled with. Therefore, in about 90% of cases, family court and divorce court, custody is awarded to the mother. In fact, culturally have the stereotype of men being not fit fathers, not natural caretakers, and that the bond between a father and a child is not nearly as strong as the one between a mother and a kid. And it is a very harmful stereotype that we will further go into in the Tropes versus Men series. In many cases in divorce and family court, we see campaigns of slander that are against the man and a natural assumption to award custody to the mother, regardless of what the children or the father may want. And the fifth right that women have that men do not is the right to call unwanted or coerced sex as rape. While men have a really hard time having their stories and their abuse being paid attention to and taken seriously on the accounts of sexual violation or unwanted touch. Even the legal system, namely the FBI, has rejected the made to penetrate clause, and so we see male anatomy and biology being used against them in cases of abuse, and we have a tremendous amount of victim blaming when it comes to male victims of sexual assault. Culturally, we've been exposed to years of Law and Order SVU and other shows that portray women as the singular victims of brutal rapes and sexual advances. And that is not at all a representation of reality. On the other hand, men are compelled to sit through sexual harassment courses and be conceived of as predators just by virtue of being male. In fact, to any kind of female rape allegations or accusation, there's an immediate reaction to ascertain the identity of the victim through rape kits and to punish the sexual harassers through a variety of legal ramifications. Even on college campuses, we see an expansion of the term rape. It is no longer a singular coerced sexual act. It is more of an umbrella term for any activity that may have even involved alcohol and have been consensual. But because it involved inebriation, the woman is deemed to not have consented, so a previously consensual act has now become rape. On the other hand, we have the recent example of a male student who was intoxicated and passed out and had a female perform oral sex on him, to which she admittedly texted to a friend she knew she was guilty of transgressing because the boy was passed out and could not consent. Yet later, she accused him of not asking her consent because he was passed out, and that oral sex she performed on him became sexual harassment towards her, and the male student was expelled from college. There's just one example in this strong drive and sensationalization we have towards college rape cases, even when they are provably false. We put on pedestal and give a lot of attention to female assault, such as the Rolling Stone case, which turned out to be false, and the Mattress Girl case turned out to be false, and even the Duke and La Crosse University big publicized scandal turned out to be false as well. We have a cultural desire to listen and believe to stories of female assault, even if they are not true. Yet when we have provable male victims of assault, we see them as attackers, and in a horrendous twist of victim blame, we proceed to victim abuse, as is in the case of the Amherst student. That altogether looks like we have the opposite of the patriarchy theory at work. Since patriarchy theory assumes that all men in government and in positions of power are interested in the oppression of women, then we need to take a look at the democratic process and to figure out who is voting these oppressive male figures into power. The number of women who desire to run for public office is lower than that of men, yet we see women overwhelmingly vote more than men. In fact, in the last presidential election, 30 million more women voted for President Barack Obama than men did. There's also a tremendous amount of power concentrated in the female vote, as we saw with the Mitt Romney women in binders blunder. And women's rights and women's advancement is a big part of any political campaign. It is an integral part of a platform that is necessary for a successful political career. If patriarchy was such a prevalent system that actively wanted to oppress women, then we would not see so much attention paid to women's rights and not so much desire to achieve equality and benefits for women as we see currently. Much like the Swedish organization ROX that worked in tandem with the government, we see UN Women and other organizations that are exclusively pro-women to exclusion of all other groups, working closely with the government and trying to put forward legislature to pass in the governmental frame. In fact, even President Obama himself has admitted to being a feminist or a feminist ally. So once again, we see quite glaring opposite result when we look at the evidence of patriarchy theory. Not to mention the fact that a majority of male elected officials are married, and we should not diminish the effect and the influence that political wives have on their husbands' campaigns and constituent support. In fact, if we break down the reasoning to instinctual levels of behind most male pursuits, such as getting a respectable job or a fancy car or a spacious house, most of these behaviors are to outcompete other men and to show value over other men in order to receive female approval and reproductive rights. That is a basic human animal instinct that we have still. And we should not discount the subtle power of women when it comes to focusing and driving male desires and pursuits. In fact, if we look deeper into the role that women play in our society, the men that they choose to reproduce with, the traits that they choose and select for mentally and physically to pass on to their children, we can say that because of that, women drive civilization. The way we look, the way we think, and how we are as people is determined by who women choose to reproduce with and who they choose to father their children. So we have a tremendous amount of desire by men to receive approval of women and to be in good graces with women and to desire female happiness. Therefore, it's not patriarchy by definition. Patriarchy theory extending into our past is not supported by evidence either. For instance, it was men in power who gave women the right to vote as soon as women campaigned for it. And in fact, there were many women who did not want that amendment to pass. And we also have evidence of queens from the time of Nefertiti to Queen Elizabeth to current day and everywhere in between. There were powerful women who enacted policy change and in a variety of other ways were influential to our society. Even Queen Bee herself has stated, "Who runs the world? Girls." So far, legally and socially, we see the empowerment of women to the exclusion of men. In fact, it appears that we actually live in a system of matriarchy after all.